My name's Nickie Lofton. I'm the director of all the nursing programs that you have here. So if you're not a nursing student, you've probably seen me poking around at some point or another. I'm happy to be here. This was a lot of fun for me. Last week I did an in-service at Atascocita Center, and then I ended up staying after to do a nursing information session because so many people wanted it. So I was like, well, okay, I'm here. We'll do this. All right, so let's start with Florence Nightingale. I'm assuming that everybody in this room has heard the name. She's not like, you know, some obscure person that we're talking about. Yes, she's considered the founder of modern nursing, but let's talk about what a nurse was prior to Nightingale. So prior to Nightingale, there was no such thing as a nurse. Yes, people nursed other people, but there wasn't a nurse, a trained nurse, or anything like that. You had religious orders, nuns, friars, those kind of things that did a lot of it, but many of them were people who were hired off of the street to work in this hospital, many of which were not very, we'll just say of ill repute, right? Some were prostitutes, some were drunk a lot of the time. They did not have a good reputation. Nurses were considered the low of all things. So yeah, this is the oldest picture I could find of a nun nurse. It's not Florence Nightingale time. It's way after that. But anyway, okay, so let's think. Florence Nightingale was born in 1820. So what was life like for women in this time frame? 1820 to 1860s, kind of where she did her best work. So let's talk about that. What's the primary job of a woman at this time?
Have a baby.
Have a baby. Raise a family, run your house, right? That is what you're expected to do. Now, it certainly isn't to leave your family's upper middle class family in London and go off and take care of people in the Crimean War, because that is what she did. Okay, so she had no voting rights. Women have no voting rights at this time. They're not even allowed to own property unless specific circumstances. So say you're married and your husband dies and you own property, you can gain it that way. But you can't just go out and buy property, not that you had any money to begin with. You had no money at all. Everything you owned, including all of your clothes, all of your girly products, actually belonged to your husband. Yes. They had limited education, most of which was just about how to raise a baby or take care of your house. Maybe to cook a little. But in her particular case, she's upper middle class. She's not cooking anything. That make sense? Who's cooking for her? Maids, servants, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so imagine if you're her and you say, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. This is what she's been raised for her whole life, and yet she's not going to do it. And that is exactly what she did. She was presented to men twice for marriage, had 2 marriage proposals, and both times she turned them down. Said no. Somewhere around the age of 17, she decided that she had this vision, whatever you want to call it, that she was supposed to go help the sick. Okay? This is not something that somebody in her socioeconomic group did. Remember, I just told you that there were really ill repute ladies. This is a woman who wasn't highly educated. Okay? So this is the most famous picture of her. She's upper middle class. Her father was a merchant. Her mother was a house lady. And they had servants and the whole bit. She was expected to do exactly what her mother did. And her mother threw a fit when she said no. Because that's what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to do exactly what your mother did, and that was it. And she was like, I have to do this. So she stood up for long enough and long enough and long enough until she was allowed to do this. She was very well educated and spoke several languages, which was unheard of for somebody at that time frame. Unheard of, because women, only education they got was about how to work in that house, how to be socially interactive, how to, all the common etiquette kinds of things. That's all she was supposed to do. But she said no, which is gotta be difficult. Now, if you were in any other group, nobody would have been, oh, you can't do that, right? But in the other side, you got to say, okay, could anybody in any other socioeconomic group be afforded the luxury of what she did? So when we go through some of these things, you're going to go, if I was a poor servant girl, nobody would have paid attention to me to do that or allowed me to even entertain that. But because she was who she was and she fought back against the system, she was allowed to do some things. Now, she was not well loved by the men in her world. Let's just say that. I'm going to show you here. Okay, so who was she? I'm going to show you these. What does that sound like? Does that sound positive? While they're probably good attributes, that's not exactly the warm and fuzzy that you think of. So this is what the men she worked with said about her. While trying to be as positive as they can, this is the best they could come up with. Okay? So while, yes, all of these things were really important, this is what her patients said about her. Okay? A little different, warm and fuzzy, isn't it? So while she is working so hard to create a better environment for these patients, the men who ran the world did not appreciate what she was offering. All right, so these are just some little facts we're going to talk about. She says she has a calling to help people about the age of 17. And then she is highly educated, more so than anybody else, and then this includes mathematics, which is unheard of for a woman. And she really, really likes statistics, okay? Statistics. Women didn't do math. They didn't do math. I love math. It makes sense to me. There's one right answer, usually. Sometimes you can have a range, but you know what I'm saying? It's not like nursing, okay? So how many answers are correct on the test in nursing? All of them. They're all correct, and we want to know which one is most correct. So you know, that's very different than a math person. So she really loved the stats part. Her parents wanted her to get married and raise a family. She was not having it. Finally, her father let her go off to a training school. We're going to call it a nursing school. It's not a nursing school. It's a training school, a hospital training school in Germany. We already know that she speaks German, French, Italian, English. Unheard of for a woman. So because she was able to do this, she was able to see different perspectives on how hospitals were run. So when she came back from Germany, she was able to get a job as a hospital superintendent in London. Okay? And this is kind of where her life starts. At this point, she comes back, she's running this hospital, she becomes friends with Queen Victoria. I wouldn't say friends, but you know what I'm saying? She got an award. Queen Victoria gave her 250,000 pounds at this time. All right, let's consider how much money that is today. I can't even imagine. It's a lot. So she gave her a lot of money as a reward. It actually comes after the war, but sorry. she gets this amount of money from her. And so that tells you that they're more than just acquaintances. So here comes 1854. This is the historic time. This is the Crimean War. Does anybody know your history on the Crimean War? It's a little part of Russia at the time. England was fighting Russia over this part of the land. Anyway, what was happening is the Secretary of War gets a hold of Florence Nightingale and says, look, well, something's happening here. Everybody's dying. We need help. Okay? Secretary of War was friends with her dad. So he knew that she was a nurse and running the hospital in London. So, hey, come, we need help. What can you do? She decides, I'm going to go over there. She takes 38 trained people from her hospital to the Crimean War. It's called Scutari. Is that up there? Yeah, Scutari, right outside of Turkey. All right, and so in the Scutari hotel, this is not, hospital. This is not a hospital, y'all. It's a barracks for military people that they're using as a hospital. Can you imagine what that must look like? There's only men there until these ladies show up. And the guy that's running this place is like, what are you doing here? Get out. I don't need any girls here. It's just going to cause more trouble. Blah, blah, blah. And she says, yeah, thanks, peace, but the queen sent me. And here I am, and we're going to take care of this. So what she did was started working on keeping track of what was happening and why. Because so many of the things that were happening there, she was like, that doesn't seem right. So what do you think people were actually dying from in this hospital? You would think infection is one, but I'm looking for something specific.
Blood loss?
Dysentery. Dysentery is what all of these people are dying from, not their battle wound. Dysentery. So what does that mean for those people who don't understand that term? There's a lot of poop going around. And you're literally dying from dehydration related to poop. Diarrhea. Lots of diarrhea, and you're dehydrated, and this is why people are dying. Not because you got shot, or you got stabbed, or something like that. So once she becomes, so once she comes, the time that she's there, she starts writing down things, and she wrote a bunch of essays while she was there. Essays talking about the different things that she was seeing. And these essays then later get put together into a little book, and I forgot it in my office, but it's 78 pages, and it's called Notes on Nursing, and every grad school nurse has read it, because we have to. It's in Old English, so it's difficult to understand, but you kind of get the gist. And so just remember that she wrote this book about nursing before the Civil War, okay? Before the Civil War in the United States. That's how long ago this book was actually written. Okay. So what is happening at this time? Well, there's a microscope. Okay, so this first one at the top is the very first type of microscope. That's not a microscope, right? It's probably a magnifying glass, if I'm being honest, but that's it. But this bottom one is the first, what's considered a compound microscope. It was improved by Lister so that we can now see all of the things, and they're actually looking down there and looking at the cells and drawing pictures, and we're learning. So we don't exactly know what a bacteria is, right? We certainly don't know what a virus is. But we know that there's something there causing this problem. She does anyway. She doesn't know what it is. There are no antibiotics. There really are very few drugs. Most of the drugs are based upon easing stomach discomfort. So let's say, for example, that last one. Wine. I'm like, that sounds like something that would make your stomach feel better, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, you know, there's really just no understanding of what's happening in the world. Yes, some of these things have starting to learn, like we knew that how plants operated, but we didn't know much about bacteria yet. All right, so the first thing she said is, we got to clean this mess up. There's animal feces and human feces on the floor. There's blood on the walls. It's really gross. We got to clean this place up. She was a huge advocate for sanitation, meaning, all right, let's not get the people infected in the first place. And so this is not a typo up here. Mortality rates dropped from 42% to 2.2%. While the girls there cleaned up everything. That's huge, right? Could we do that today? We couldn't even do this during COVID, you know? So that's just going to show you. And so she's also known as that lady with the lamp, and she walked around, and so all those pictures that you've ever seen of Florence Nightingale holding that little lamp on her little finger, they're wrong. This is the lamp she carried. This is in the Florence Nightingale Museum. It's a paper lantern. This is what she carried. Yeah. All right. So this is kind of how we're going to compare each one. So the first one talks about, this is her statement, keep the air he breathes as pure as the external air, without chilling him, clean air, no smoke. She really hated chimneys. Of course, they're the modern day chimneys. They didn't have the venting like we do now. So smoke would be in the room. The walls would be covered with soot. And, you know, you've just got a gloomy area. So now, of course, we know that our air now went through ventilation systems, kept perfectly clear. We can even, excuse me, put a patient in a reverse isolation room where no germ in that room comes out when you open the door, because we have a suction type device in there to remove that, to prevent, like, you're really contagious. We don't want any of your germs getting out there to anybody else. We're going to filter your air special. So we know we can do that. So, I mean, she knew this, what, 160 years ago? And we're still doing it today. And light and noise. She's very clear about a dark house is an unhealthy house. In the book, she talks directly about how much noise interferes with a person's ability to heal. We know that's true. We do not do a good job at that. Anybody spend the night in the hospital before? Yeah. You know, do you get much sleep in the hospital? No, unfortunately we don't. But that's part of how the process works, and unfortunately we don't do a good job. So all of the nurses in here and healthcare people, just remember that when you're in the hospital, the volume at which you work affects a patient. So loud, obnoxious noises, while you might be having a good time and fun with your friends, is not great for your patient. Cleanliness. Oh my gosh, y'all. I told y'all about the 78-page book, right? There's a whole page in this book, almost a whole page of 78, that talks about carpet. And why do you think she cared about carpets in the 1860s? Carpet's gross. Well, think of the time. We have no electricity. We have no real good ways of cleaning. There was no way to vacuum. We didn't have paved roads. So you were walking along, whatever's on your feet and your shoes comes in and gets on your carpet. And now you've brought in feces from animals outside into your area. Gross. So with good reason. She might have a little different opinion in today's world because we have a better sanitation. Your chances of you actually stepping in poo when you're walking into the building is pretty small, but never zero. But I'm just saying it's less than it would be if it back in that time. So while we have great emphasis placed on cleaning and sterilizing and specially trained to clean up specific kinds of spills, housekeepers that are trained to disinfect rooms that have been just destroyed by an emergency code and that kind of stuff. So we know all about how what she knew back then is still true today. But the only problem is she didn't know why this was happening, but she knew it was happening. It's kind of like how we know that a red-headed woman bleeds more after birth. We know that. Did y'all know that? Do we know that? Yeah. So a red-headed woman, after delivering a baby, bleeds a lot more than a regular other person. Also, that redheaded needs more anesthesia and medicines to get the same amount of effect. So, yeah, something to look forward to. Sorry. You're a little red, not bad red. And so she has a whole chapter written about the health of houses, meaning how clean is it? How is there water available? Is there clean air? Are you opening the windows? And windows should be on both sides of the room so that when you open, air goes through. Remember, this is a time frame with no air conditioning or fans or anything like that. There's no electricity. So now we have a much better way of taking care of those kind of things. And still, things like primary care, meaning your doctor's appointment, so you go to your family practice guy and he puts you on blood pressure medicine, that's considered primary care. Those are things that we do now that still represent that, keeping your house clean and healthy. Make sense? Yeah. And we won't have a disagreement here, but the immunizations are important. Okay, so she also loved the fact that people had, especially if they were potted, she wanted potted plants and flowers to be around. And she told people that the flowers and put off more oxygen and therefore were better for a room. She knew that way back when. Well, we rarely forbid them now. Occasionally they are forbidden depending on what's going on with your patient, but it's rare. So an immunocompromised person may not be allowed to have flowers in their room, but for good reason. They didn't really have immunocompromised like we do now. I mean, yes, you had immunocompromised people, but we have drugs now that create that problem. She also was very strict about having regular food and about having food smells that somebody else has to smell. So in other words, this patient over here should not have to smell his food, especially if he doesn't want food. It stinks, and that's painful for him. Also, that the food that they eat should be healthy, not something that would be considered old or unrefrigerated, like we do. We have refrigerators now. They didn't. So keeping food fresh was difficult. Oh yes, you should pick up the food and remove it when they're done eating. So, and this was all back then. All back then, she was saying, shouldn't linger around because it's disgusting. It creates a draw for insects of different kinds to come into the room, and you don't want that. And most famously, now we all know about how ultraviolet light now kills germs, right? We all have these little things that we can put our stuff in and disinfect them and all. But she said you need to air sheets. Now she didn't mean air sheets. She meant put them outside in the sun, whether they're clean or dirty, to put them out in the sun so that the sunlight hits them to remove excretions And she called it putrefaction of bodily fluids. So in other words, you sweat up to 3 pints a day, and all of that is in your sheets, and then it dries, and with your skin cells, and so she was really clear on the sheets. So, and as you know, in the hospital, we're constantly changing them. They get a little dirty, we're changing a sheet. At least the nurses are. We're changing a sheet nearly every day. Now, I will hazard to guess that most of you in here do not change your sheets at home every week. Or even every 2 weeks. I know, that's gross. but still, people don't do it like you think they would do. And she was telling them, no, this has got to be done every day. At a time when we didn't really have a good reason to. And luckily to get the sheets, because they didn't have a lot of resources back then. That's where the Queen came in. Okay, so Crimean War's over, she goes home, and this is what she creates. This is actually her thing. So all of the red center are the actual deaths from actual war injuries. The other green stuff that you see are the deaths that were related to something other than the injury that brought them to the hospital. So you can see, we get better, we get worse, depending on the number of battles and conflicts that are happening. But she was able to prove that these numbers do not actually represent what was actually happening while they're there. This was all deaths from essentially cholera or dysentery. And one of her famous quotes is, to understand God's thoughts, one must study statistics. Okay. I love statistics. It's really fun to me, but it's not fun to everybody, and I understand this. She was a really serious character, but I'm going to tell you we got some fun stuff coming. So in 1860, she's back from the Crimean War. She gets that 250,000 pounds that I was telling you about from the Queen, Victoria. She opens a St. Thomas's School for Nursing, the Nightingale School for Nursing at the St. Thomas's Hospital. So, if you have ever seen when the princesses come out with their little babies, like, here's the new prince, la, la, la. That's St. Thomas's Hospital that you're seeing in the background. So this is a very famous hospital. I can tell you right now that it looks exactly the same, except for it's like a really orangey color now. The modern day pictures are kind of like put them side by side and look, and the windows line up and the columns line up. It's like, okay. So yeah, it looks very much the same. But the whole point here was that she started using scientific principles to teach nurses. Nurses did not truly exist before this time. This is the very first nursing school. The very first, saying, previously it was passed from person to person. Midwives, daughters became midwives, and that's how babies were delivered. But at this point, this is where all of our beginning of the evidence-based practice principles come in. So she decided that this is what we're going to do. We're going to use this, and I'm going to petition the Queen for better public health, better public sanitation, and use those principles that we found over there and bring it here to London to improve the health of all of our country. Not an easy task, okay? Not an easy task. She was really known for her leadership, but y'all, she was a take no stick from anybody kind of person. All right, so I'm going to get more to that in a minute. And interesting, this is a true statement on the very bottom. She said this in a letter to Queen Victoria, a little gin would be more popular. All right, so we know that she knew about alcohol and its prevention of disease and infection. The Queen was discussing with her what she could send to the troops as a pick-me-up, and she suggested that she would send them cologne. And Florence says a little gin would be more popular. And I'm quite sure she didn't mean for antiseptic purposes. I feel like maybe that was really based upon a drink. And so as time moves on, her graduates become directors and form more schools and more schools and more schools. And then we have this school right here, which is the New England Hospital for Women and Children that started here in the U.S., first hospital ever. And those nurses were trained in her school. And then they came here. And that's how we become a nursing school. It's slowly but surely we fanned out and we've created this program that it is now. Now, nursing school then was not what nursing school is now. Nursing school then was basically a nurse's aid course that you would take now. But this is where we all come from. And so if you look, you can see this on the top building. You see that little spire they got? And this is the building today. It's still there. It's called the Diamond Community Health Center and still functioning by wealthy endowments. All right, so I will tell you that nursing is the #1 most respected, considered the most trustworthy and most honest profession in 23 years now. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. 23 years in a row has been named the most trusted profession. The evidence-based practice that we do now, and I'm sure that that extends to everybody else, that evidence-based practice is based upon things that she developed way back when, and we have developed it even further than it was. She even is known for helping design the way a hospital is built and the way it runs. Like, you know, there's a way to build a hospital in which functions well for everybody, including the hallways, the size of the rooms, the air ventilation, the way the windows open, all of the kind of layout and all of that is attributed also to her in a rudimentary way. So, what would she have done for COVID? I really didn't even think of this until I was doing research, and I read an article and was like, whoa, okay. So many of her principles could still apply. Hygiene, right? Infection control, air cleanliness, and also being data-driven, where you always decide what's the best thing. Now, I can tell you, when COVID hit, you know, all of you heard all the stuff on the news, right? Stuff coming out in the news. Every day was something different, right? Something different, something different, something different. Well, that happened for me in managing all of my students. So this day, okay, we need 2 shots. The next day, well, maybe 1 is enough. The next day, well, a lab report saying your immune is not good enough. You still have to have the shots because immunity wears off so much. So every day, I was having to send out new information to my students, and they got very frustrated with us. I don't blame them. We were frustrated too, because I never knew what the day was going to bring. Never knew what new thing that they were going to tell me had to be. But here's the thing, is if you wanted to go into the hospital, you had to do what they said, and if you didn't go in the hospital, you couldn't graduate. Everybody has to do field work, right, for y'all? Field work, and you have to meet their requirements. And so if they told me you needed 2 shots, you had to have 2 shots, and if you didn't want to get 2 shots, then you couldn't go to clinical. I had no say in it. It was very frustrating for them. Totally understood. But they were doing what the CDC said, and the CDC didn't really all know what we were learning as fast as we could. All right, so this is her most famous quote on top. It says, "I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse." You hear it in almost every pinning, like ceremony or something like that, but that's not my favorite. The next one is my favorite. It says, "I think one's feelings waste themselves in words. They ought to be distilled into actions which bring results." So, I ain't talking, but really what I want is to see the end result. And how is my patient when I'm done with them? That's all that matters. Doesn't matter how flowery I can talk. Doesn't matter. This is her at 90 years old when she died in 1910. Yep. She had, in Crimea, she developed a case of what's called brucellosis. Okay, and it plagued her for the rest of her life. And so she had issues with her health from that time forward. But she lived to be 90, which is more than most people at that time frame. Most people did not live that long. There are so many memes out there. So many memes. Like one that says, "Florence Nightingale watching me while I don't count my patient's respirations." Florence Nightingale watching me chart 0 for pain when the patient tells me a story about 1962. Those kind of things. But, the memes are cute and all, but she was a super serious woman. She would not have appreciated the jokes. That would not have been her favorite way. But, we still say, us nurses are still highly respective of Florence Nightingale. Always will be. No matter what happens, we have a background to look at, and we know that this is where we came from. Now, it's a completely different profession than it was back then, but it's still got its roots from what we like. Thank you.